Today's episode is brought to you by MRC, a branding studio hailing out of Raleigh, North Carolina, where they focus on crafting killer design work for clients that love uber creative solutions for companies small and large. You can find and connect with them online at mrcraleigh.com. That's MRCRALEIGH, and at MRC Raleigh on Instagram. The good news is, if you find yourself reaching out, you'll most likely get to chat with yours truly. That's right, it's My Little Branding Co., and we're here to make your brand or idea look amazing. So let's connect. Today's episode is also sponsored by Bernie Wild's Adventure Sauce. Bernie Wild's is an adventure brand that's a place where my love of art and food come together in all the right ways. Bernie Wild's Adventure Sauce is a chef-driven heat sauce that in my book is literally the tastiest and most versatile condiment on the planet. This is an everyday sauce that's perfect with salads, fries, burgers, sushi, and pasta. I call it comfort food in a bottle, and it's 100% all natural, plant-based, gluten-free, and flavor-packed. Its unique, craveable flavor has a chipotle smokiness that's perfectly balanced with its creamy carrot base, mixed with a bit of maple syrup, charred onion, miso, and ají amarillo. But don't take my word for it. If you want to see what others have to say, visit BernieWilds.com to check out more. And speaking of, we also sell Bernie Wild's comic books and comic panels created and signed by me, not to mention super dope stickers, shirts, and more. I'm giving each and every one of our Pencil Pushers listeners 20% off for their first online order to show my love for all you supporters of the podcast. So just go to BernieWilds.com, place your order, and enter the code PENCIL. That's BURNYWILDS.com. That's it, folks. It's that easy. And now, without further ado, on to the show.
Recorded at the Kitchen Studios. This is the Pencil Pushers Podcast.
All right, ladies and gentle people, I am very, very pleased to have my next guest on the Pencil Pushers Podcast. It's been a little while since we've done an episode. As you all know, I am very busy with work, and so I don't get a chance to interview as often as maybe I or y'all would like, but I'm very, very happy to have Courtney DiPaola here, who is going to be talking to us about her budding career, and my goodness, what a career it's been already. She's been doing some amazing things. She started out, firstly, one of the things that I'm very excited about is she's a traditional hand-drawn animator, which I love. Of course, y'all know that. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that. She's an NYU grad. She has, in her brief career, she's worked with a friend of the podcast, Dean Leonard's Dear Anna Olson, which is, I think, reaching maybe the final phase, like maybe about 80% done, I think. I have contributed to his campaign, and I hope y'all have too. So she's been an animator there. She's also been an animator with the Academy Award-winning Hair Love, which I think won an award. Was it 2021, I believe? We'll talk to her a little bit about that. She has been with Warner Brothers. I think she's been there with Animaniacs, and she may have been with a couple other projects as well. We'll get into that. Over the past couple of years, she's been working with Disney legendary animator Andreas Deja, who's just released his long-awaited animated short, Mushka, which is working the circuits right now for festivals, and she's currently an animator at Walt Disney Studios full-time. So I'm going to try and poke and prod and figure out what's happening over there, because that makes me very excited. But and lastly, according to her Tumblr page, she's also a tennis enthusiast, and she cannot be trusted with kettle corn, apparently. I'm not exactly sure why that's the case, but welcome, Courtney. Thank you for spending some time with us. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Really excited
Awesome.
to talk.
Awesome. Sounds great. Well, listen, let's just kind of jump right into it. I don't really know that much about you, so I'd like to keep it very conversational, as I tend to do. Tell me a little bit about like where this all began for you. Where are you from? And then how did you start getting into this love of animation?
I'm originally from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and it was honestly a pretty windy path for me to animation. I definitely wasn't one of those people who, has wanted to do it since I was a kid or anything. I have drawn since I was a kid, but I was always a really frustrated art student. I just couldn't settle on a medium. I was always hopping around. I would do these super realistic graphite drawings, and then I'd look at classmates who were doing these charcoal, like abstract drawings that felt so energetic and emotional, and I'd want to do that, and then I'd try that and want to do something with color and more storytelling, and so I was always really frustrated. And then I had a student teacher at, I think, my senior year of high school who was reviewing a project I had done and was going through my sketchbook and told me, or she basically told me, I think you're trying to animate, and maybe you should explore that. At the time, she had shown me, I was still doing a lot of charcoal at the time, so she showed me the work of William Kentridge. I don't know if you know his work.
No.
He's a South African artist. He's worked in a lot of different mediums. For his animation, he has this really interesting process where he'll do a large charcoal drawing, take a picture of it, and then erase the parts that will move, redraw it, take another picture.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
so on. So it creates this really cool effect because you can't fully erase charcoal, so there's just like a little bit of a ghostly trail that follows the...
Creates a nice little effect there.
Yeah, it's cool. It was
What's his name again?
William Kentridge.
Huh.
He's more... I don't know how he would categorize his work. It feels more like fine art, almost experimental to me personally. But it really led me to a more... It just opened my eyes to a lot of possibilities. I had never considered animation or filmmaking in general. And at that time, I actually kind of continued my windy road and got more into like live action and was interested in directors who dabbled in animation, but I wasn't fully in animation yet.
Like who,
so
for example?
Well, at the time in high school, it was kind of around that time of like a lot of Michel Gondry music videos and where he was playing with so many different like stop motion and pixelation techniques.
Yeah.
And I just thought I really liked practical effects and like kind of just film trickery, really, of any kind. So I ended up going to NYU for live action, but was once again just very frustrated. I was within the film community then at school doing a lot of art direction, doing a lot of prop building, dabbling in animation techniques, but not really finding something to settle on.
Were you drawing pretty intensely still at this point, or was that a little bit more on the back burner?
A little more on the back burner, except for my animation classes, because I was doing intro to animation. But my intro class, I did kind of more stop motion than hand drawn at that point. I was really kind of all over the map still.
Yeah.
But before my senior year there, I was finally going to be taking a class with John Canemaker, who, for anyone who doesn't know, John Canemaker is an incredible person, but he's also won the Oscar for his short The Moon and the Sun, and he's a very prolific animation historian and an incredible teacher. And so I was really excited to finally take his class. He had been on sabbatical when most people take his class. So I took a bunch of his books out from the library, one of them being his biographies on the 9 Old Men. And it was just like one of those fully cliche lightning bolt moments where like everything, all of my kind of disparate interests just kind of clicked into place with how they were describing character animation, which I had kind of been circling around for many years but hadn't been focusing on, in the way that they were talking about the acting and the character and the storytelling and kind of all of that. And it really just set me into like full 9 Old Men tunnel vision. It was like all I thought about. Like I was just watching the movies on a loop. I was digging into like everything I could find about them. And it kind of started from there.
Yeah, nice. So did you have, just out of curiosity, a kind of a top 3 animators of the 9 Old Men that you were that you favorited in particular?
Yeah, I'm actually really glad you said 3, because that's kind of the only
3?
number I've ever been able to narrow it down to. I always gravitated to.
Can I take a guess?
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Well, Milk Hall. You
Okay.
can guess the other two.
No, not necessarily. Well, then, if it's that, then I might have to go with Mark Davis. Would have to be one.
I'm not giving it.
Oh no. Okay. Oh God, that puts the pressure. Well, I mean, I'm just gonna I'm gonna impress my own probably personal feelings about it, but I would probably my top three would be Milk Hall, Ward Kimball, and probably Mark Davis, which I is, in some ways I have a little bit of a heartbreak about that, just because I always feel bad for John Lounsbury and, the others that like Les Clark doesn't really get much love. But
Yeah.
if it's not those three, it's probably Milk Hall, Frank Thomas, and Ollie Johnston.
My three have always been Milk Hall, Frank Thomas, John Lounsbury. Which I will say,
nice.
I love all of them.
Yeah.
But,
Okay. Yeah.
I have such a soft spot for Mark Davis and Ollie Johnston and Ward Kimball too. It's really hard to narrow it down with them.
Yeah.
But John Lounsbury has a quality to his drawings that I just really gravitate towards. His animals, especially like the elephants in Jungle Book and the wolf in Sword in the Stone, and
Yeah.
they're just so funny and appealing to me. And Frank Thomas's acting is
Right.
unbelievable. Like
Yeah.
there's a sequence on YouTube somewhere of his test with Pinocchio in the cage
Oh my God.
and one of the fairies from Sleeping Beauty. There are just a handful of tests specifically that just like blow my mind with him. The acting choices.
I think I'm always just blown away when I think about the animation that was done as early as Pinocchio. When you see the jump from 1928 to, let's assume, probably, I think they got started. I'm currently reading the Walt Disney biography. I think they got started on Pinocchio somewhere around 1938.
Yeah.
The movie came out in 1940, I believe. Just to see how insane, knowing that Frank Thomas was able to figure out the physics of the rocking and having Pinocchio move about so believably is just unreal. Unreal.
And especially when you think about the fact that, they aren't testing it right away. They're just, doing it all on paper, flipping it, and sending it off to be tested on film.
Yeah.
So they're not getting live feedback or anything. They're kind of inventing the rules of animation at the same time, too. So there's not anyone to really look to in that way, because they're just making such strides forward. It is really wild to think about. It's almost like a Great Pyramid thing for me, where it just doesn't make sense that they did what they did when they did it.
It's so true. Yeah, it's so true. And it's very interesting just reading that biography too, to see like once they, because Snow White was considered to be Walt Disney's great folly, right? That was like everybody, all the press were, saying this is crazy. Nobody is going to want to see this movie. Nobody's going to want to watch an animated, anything for more than 4 minutes. And then as soon as he made all that money, he invested it all into the studio. So they just like built this incredible studio and like housed it with all kinds of schooling, training, so that they could really understand, like when they started getting into Bambi, the structure of the anatomy of all the different animals and stuff. I mean, it's just unreal. I mean, Walt was just an incredible advocate for his artists, which was, it's hard to come by these days, I would imagine. But anyway, so that was what really kind of sparked it for you, huh?
Yeah, I just fully went down that rabbit hole of, all things Nine Old Men, which is also where I ended up discovering Andreas first, because, you don't have to dig that far into the Nine Old Men before you encounter Andreas Deja. He's just like
the biggest fan.
The biggest fan. He's one of the number one people who champions their work. So you will encounter him quickly when you're looking up their work. And that kind of led me to, at that point, I hadn't really followed the timeline yet to, learn about the generation that they had trained or any of the artists still working today.
Right, back in the 70s, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that kind of continued my interest.
Yeah, so did NYU live action, you started moving into, obviously they have an animation department there.
Yeah.
What was that like? What was that transition like? And did you see any kickback knowing that traditional animation was like, all the money is going into CG. Obviously that means that a lot of the schools are going to be focusing a lot on that. What did that look like at NYU, and did you get any kickback?
Not really. NYU, when I was there at least, was very much a school about filmmaking kind of generally. Like they wanted to teach you to be a good storyteller. They wanted you to make the films you wanted to make. So they really encouraged you to kind of follow whatever styles or techniques you were interested in.
Okay.
And especially within the animation department, at least when I was there, was quite small. My senior class was, I think, 5 people in our advanced animation class.
Mm-hmm.
So really small. And when I had made the transition fully to animation, my main teachers were John K. Maker and Dean Leonard. So, they are extremely encouraging people.
Yeah.
And NYU I think independent filmmaking was seen as a valid path to follow. So
right.
They didn't, there were a couple other teachers who definitely encouraged me to look maybe into story or CG, thinking maybe I was aiming for studios or that kind of work, so they didn't think I would be able to maybe find success with hand-drawn just because, the studios were not doing it at that point. But
yeah,
I think I had just been frustrated for so long. Like I mentioned, my whole, the last 8 years had been just searching for a medium that I wanted to stick to. So when I found it, I became just so hard-headed about it. I just felt like I at least needed to try.
Yeah.
To make it work. I felt like I could compromise on how big the projects were. I didn't need to work at a big studio, and I didn't. I would have been happy finding independent work, or I don't know. I don't even think I really thought too much practically about what it would look like. I just knew I wanted to continue learning about it and see what would happen, and if there was a way to make it work at that point.
Yeah, so you weren't too deterred in any way, seeing the landscape, particularly in the United States, being so heavily reliant on CG projects, or did you find it?
Looking back, I really wasn't. I probably should have been. I just was so in my own world, just so excited about it that I didn't think that practically about it.
Right.
I just kind of locked myself away because I hadn't made the decision to do it until my senior year. So by the time I had finished school, I only had a year of really focusing on it. So I knew I wanted to do it, but I was not good. I was so... I didn't really know what I was doing. My drawing skills weren't where they had to be. My reel was a really far away from ever getting a job. It felt like, at least. So I had kind of just locked myself away to try to keep teaching myself. And just surrounded myself with it. So in my world, it was everywhere. I wasn't really living in the real world at that point.
Yeah. So I would imagine, I'm sure that you were already a great artist before your senior year came into play, but I don't think that a lot of people really understand, unless you're really in it, how much of an incredible draftsperson you need to be, and have a strong study of human and animal anatomy, not just how they are drawn, but also how they move in the world with, again, like using physics and weight and not even just that, but also the sort of illusion of life with squash and stretch and all that kind of stuff, right? I mean, what was your, what was your ability like at that point? Did you really have to kind of dig in and start, taking more life drawing classes, or, in order to position yourself to be a, formidable player kind of thing?
Yeah, no, my drawing was not, it had a long ways to go at that point. I was doing a lot of life drawing and a lot of figure drawing. There's a series of figure drawing books from an old Disney professor, or who taught the life drawing there. Mm-hmm. I wish I could remember, but
I wish I could remember too.
The issue I was really having at that time is that I had a lot of ideas of what I wanted to be able to do for the acting of scenes. Like that's the side of things that came a little more naturally for me, but I couldn't draw them. I didn't have the facility to really, rotate the characters the way I wanted to, if that's what I felt like was right for the acting. Like I just couldn't.
Sure.
I couldn't make it do what I wanted. So that definitely was a long road, and that's still something that continues. I am constantly trying to work on the draftsmanship, because it always feels like you could do better. And
of course, and I'm sure you've probably even with working with highly talented longtime animators, I'm sure all of them will probably say, I'm still learning. Yeah, I'm not sure if you've experienced that for sure, but by this time, by your senior year, I'm assuming you start working with Dean, like taking classes. How did that roll into the relationship of like working on his not pet project, but his kind of almost like magnum opus for him, for him right now, right? I mean, he's been working on it for quite some time.
Yeah, he was my advanced animation professor, so he was the person I was working with on my thesis at NYU, and it happened pretty organically. I think a few ex-students have ended up working on Dear Anna Olsen. So after I graduated, he just mentioned it as, wondering if I would be interested, which of course I was. I had never animated for anybody else at that point, and it felt like such a comfortable opportunity. I had such imposter syndrome at that point, and so the opportunity to, number one, work on such a beautiful film, because you've seen
it looks shots from that just film. It's incredible, gorgeous.
Yeah. But also to kind of do it in a way that felt more comfortable, because he had already seen my roughs. We'd already worked together. I felt comfortable getting notes from him, which can be really scary at first. I mean, I feel like still sometimes every new job, like the first time sending someone your roughs is a little scary, of like, don't worry, this is just the roughs, it'll get better. But it was very organic, lucky opportunity. I was really happy to work on his film.
Yeah, so let's jump to, working on your next project. You started working on Hair Love. How did that come to be?
For a few years at that point, Mushka is such a funny one with Andreas.
Oh, did you start that before?
7 years.
Right.
So for a long time, I was kind of doing little odd jobs, but Mushka was my second job.
Okay, no, let's talk about this then. We'll get into Hair Love. So how did you? Because to be honest, I've been following since the inception on his blog, on Andreas Deja's blog, right?
Yeah.
Deja Vu, I think it's called.
Yeah.
And if anybody is a fan of animation, it's a great resource, not just on his sort of like his own projects, his own work, but also he's such a historian of animation, a lover of animation. There's a lot of incredible drawings that he actually owns of like some of the greatest scenes in animation history. So he shares a lot of that stuff. So it's really, really awesome. Highly recommend it. Anyway, so how did you jump from Anna Olsen to getting the job at on his project?
I had also been a huge follower of his blog for many years at that point. And I forget if it was through his blog or through CTN's website. CTN Expo is a animation convention in Burbank every year. And he announced that he was recruiting at that year's event for a film he was doing. I don't think I even knew he was doing the film yet, but I saw the recruiting and I kind of fully lost my mind because he was just such a big figure to me. It is kind of hard to understate.
Yeah, it's like the next generation of 9 old men, really.
Yeah. No, and he also, like, there's so many artists that I really admire that I would love to work with that I just respect so much. But he was on this kind of separate tier for me because, when I had been just locked away in my room trying to learn, it can be really hard to self-motivate. It can be really hard to keep yourself from being discouraged. And he was really one of the main voices that I would go to stay excited. His podcasts, his blog, he was kind of the voice that kept me inspired and kept me going. So it was like the closest I've ever felt to like that I willed something into existence. The fact that this project was happening, and I threw my reel together, was already going to the convention, so I was very lucky to get an interview with him, and there he
before you get into it, what was because I obviously I'm very curious about it, but I do think that it would be maybe informative for any prospective, like anybody who's dreaming of being an animator. What was it that was unique? Because clearly he was not, I'm sure he had a long list of people that were wanting to get on the project, young animators like yourself. Yeah. So what was it do you have any idea what was it in your reel or your interviewing process that lifted you above the rest to get you to be a part of the project? Are you aware?
I haven't asked him. My reel at the time, I mean, it was entirely pencil, which I'm sure set me apart as a weirdo of the time because
right.
I didn't know anyone else who was working on pencil at the time.
Wow.
I had kind of structured. I never ended up finishing my thesis film. It was really kind of more a method of learning and kind of putting together a reel, but the characters I had picked for that film were very much there were a lot of four-legged, like quadruped animals. There were some effects. There was a little girl and a bigger kind of muscular man. And I was definitely trying to work out all of the different mechanics.
Right. Some versatility there.
Yeah, trying to show a wide range of, what I was working on and what I was able to do. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure what. I sort of feel like the pencil helped.
Yeah. And obviously the talent, because it wouldn't... Just doing it on paper and pencil is not going to cut it. So I'm sure it was some really great work. So anyway, so you did the interview and then
yeah, I did the interview and there.
What was that like, by the way, being such a hero? I mean,
it was so scary. And actually, you did mention that I'm a tennis enthusiast, and I'm specifically a big Roger Federer fan. And I remember because I was so scared, I was just like waiting outside, imagining I was Roger Federer with a break point chance. Like I was just trying to psych myself up.
There you go.
It wasn't fully working. I was so nervous. Yeah. But it was a really fast interview because actually he was more so giving me the opportunity to do a tiger test. So I was animating a tiger walking in a circle, which is a tricky test. So I went back home to New York to work out that test, which took me a while. I, for some reason, had the tiger walking in such a big circle. Like, it didn't...
It's like way far off in the horizon line. Walking back.
Coming around. It took a while, but...
So he gave you some time. You were able to go back home and focus on it for what, a couple weeks or something like that, or?
I think he would actually. I think I probably sent him something within the month for the first pass. He had started recruiting kind of far before the point that he was animating. He was still in the storyboarding process.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of time, and he didn't really give deadlines. He just kind of asked me to try it out. I didn't have to do tiger stripes, which was very helpful. But just wanted to figure out the mechanics of a tiger, which is really tricky because they are such a strange mix of, like, they're so strong and heavy, but they're so graceful and fluid, and that mix is a hard one to pull off.
How many times did you walk? Did you have like Jungle Book on your laptop while you were working on stuff?
Had a lot of Jungle Book. He did want a realistic tiger, so I definitely looked at it, especially just to see how Milt had broken it down and kind of caricatured it a little bit. 'Cause, he has such a strong
personality.
and such a design and graphic design specifically. Like, it's not. There are some things he does with the shape of those legs that is not like a tiger, but it feels like a tiger, and it just feels so right. But I had a lot of zoo footage specifically because they do pace in circles a lot, and so that was really helpful. A lot of resources for just watching tigers walking, kind of like those old Muybridge style references. Yeah, and just did my best with that, which I think I do know that was kind of, when you asked what he saw in my reel, I think doing the tiger test was the thing he has mentioned the most, that was kind of the big test for him. Like, if I could just kind of figure out the mechanics and figure out how to make it feel like a tiger, and get the draftsmanship down for that.
Yeah, and then what happened? How did you get the call? How did you hear that you were accepted as one of the animators?
Well, it's kind of become a funny story now. So I didn't mean. Well, what ended up happening is that he sent me a note that said, "Beautiful tiger test, congratulations."
Whoa.
And I didn't fully know what it meant. Because
he didn't say, "You have the job."
I don't know if something else had happened or if there was another email, or I know he in his mind he had given me the job. I am so literal and like scared of everything that I don't ever feel like it's 100% until it's happening. So
right.
I was kind of like, what does this mean? And then I talked to my friends and they'd be like, it means you have the job. And I'd be like, but what if it doesn't? And it was kind of a ordeal for a minute. But then it was clarified to me in an email. And I ended up moving out to LA for the job.
I can't even imagine, like, for you, knowing how much of a fan you are and admirer of him, what that must have felt like,
Yeah, it was really overwhelming because also, once you get the job, it's kind of this thing where you've been trying to get it for so long, and kind of this energy of like, I know I can do it, like, give me a chance. And then you get it, and it immediately, for me, becomes like, oh no, I hope I can actually pull this off. Like,
right. So that imposter syndrome comes back in. Yeah.
And I remember that the first time, I had just moved here, and he was showing me the first sequence that he had animated, and he had done the entire sequence. There was one gap for me to fill in, and it was so intimidating because his work is so beautiful. And at that point, I had done one job.
Right. But were you a key animator for that section, or were you in betweening? Do you mean
key?
Okay.
I had thought I was.
Wow.
Original recruiting was opening for animator and in-betweener, and it was one application. I had thought I would be put in the in-betweener category, but he had hired me as an animator, so it was straight to that, which was very overwhelming, especially, there are a couple of things about Mushka that made it especially overwhelming. I do want to note, he couldn't have been kinder. All of this was very much like he was just built up so much in my mind that this was...
Yeah. Plus, it was his passion project.
Yeah.
I'm sure even that was... Yeah.
Yeah, but, the project is... there's no cleanup department.
Yeah. Right.
So it's very much in the style of his tie-down pencil test, which if you've ever seen any of... his pencil tests on Scar or Jafar or Lilo or any of them, it stays in that style, which meant that my drawings just had to sit next to his drawings, which is scary, especially in the very beginning.
Did you have anybody to commiserate with, other animators on the project at all?
Not at the beginning, no, because I was the first one there. So at that point, the entire film was his animation. I was the first other animator.
Mm-hmm. Was it in a studio, like an office, or was it at his house with tables out there, or?
It was at his studio. I would work from home though.
Okay.
So, it would be kind of a process where I would be working from home, but I'd once we had a shot in a place that he was happy with, I would bring the drawings over to his house, and he would kind of pick through them and find some keys to do drawovers of, to help me keep things on model and make it look consistent with his, because it had to be. And especially at that, I learned very quickly that I couldn't think about drawing like him in the beginning stages, because it would just psych me out. Like, I would get really stiff with the acting because I was so worried about the drawing.
Mm-hmm.
So we found a happy medium where I would keep things really loose, and then later in the process he would help me get the drawings to be where they had to be.
Right. Did he have, for some reason I could be making this up, but did he have, what do they call it? It's not maquettes. What is it? Or like a 3D model of it, so of the characters, so that you can use that as reference points, or not?
Not, no. He had a lot of model sheets. He did have some tigers, kind of tiger props that he gave me just for reference. Yeah. But they weren't the character. It was really helpful still, but But yeah, not the character.
What was the biggest kind of takeaway of like working with him? What were what's the biggest surprise that you had from that experience, that you took away from that experience?
I think that the most important one for me, going into it, I was such a perfectionist in kind of a paralyzing way, where I would just redo things over and over and over, and I would get to a point where I hated it and I would throw it away and start over. And over the course of the project, it happened very organically, but it really taught me to trust my instincts a bit more. And also, so what kept happening is I would send him my initial pass in my mind thinking, this needs so many notes, it's not working right now. And he would come back with a couple minimal notes, and that would always surprise me, but I would go with it. And then when I would go to his studio for him to do the drawovers, he would pull out one of my drawings that I had been really struggling with, and he would just so casually make it gorgeous. He'd pull out a new piece of paper and just do this gorgeous drawing, just like casually talking to me, the radio going with classical music, like so easy breezy. And I would get home and want to flip between my drawing and his drawing, thinking, like, now it's beautiful. He must have made so many changes. And when I would flip, it was always so surprising to me because it was very subtle shifts, if any. Like, he was keeping all my pose.
Wow.
He was really keeping the expressions. He was doing these really subtle changes that made a huge difference, but they weren't the big things that I always went to in my mind.
Total
like,
structural, right? Detail. Yeah.
So it really taught me to kind of trust the foundation that I set a bit more. And if I don't feel like something's working, that it might be a smaller fix than I might think. That, those little tweaks can go a long way.
Yeah. Nothing more invaluable than having a mentor, not only just a boss, but like a mentor who is so gracefully helping you along on a project like that with so much pressure. It's pretty amazing. And you worked on that for quite a while, for 4 or 5 years. Am I wrong?
7.
On and
actually.
off? 7 years. Wow.
7.
Okay.
Pretty consistently. I had, some other jobs came along, but I had at least one shot of that film on my desk for 7 years.
Wow. And then in between that, you were also working on Hair Love, right? So that's where that came in as well.
Yeah, because I was doing some other freelance just to, make ends meet. And Hair Love
obviously a bigger production.
Yeah, Hair Love really came out of thin air. I just got an email about it.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, well, to be honest, it's kind of a mysterious one because I got an email that they had gotten my contact from Glen Keane, which I don't know how that happened, but
small name drop there.
Well, I'm sorry. It's just like one of the great mysteries of my life. One of my close friends has been his assistant for a long time.
Okay.
So I think he had handed my name along because I had been looking for work, and I think it just got passed along. Sorry, I don't know how to tell that story without that, because to be honest, I think because Glenn recommended me, they asked me 0 questions. It was just
wow. Yeah.
And maybe, I don't know, I was only on that project for 2 weeks actually, because it was, I don't know how much you know about that production, but they had been crowdfunded.
Yeah, I did hear about that. Yeah, Kickstarter.
And then through however things had panned out, they had the opportunity to show it in front of Angry Birds 2, I think.
Okay.
So there was this opportunity to be in theaters, and so they had to expedite everything. So they brought in a lot of crew to make that happen, and I was a part of that kind of extra crew.
Okay.
For the last 2 weeks of kind of a big production push.
Yeah.
Which was my first time working in a studio, 'cause at that point I had always been remote. It was my first time like in dailies and all of that. Also, the directors of that project were Matthew Cherry, Everett Downing, and Bruce Smith, who's another incredible giant. And they weren't in studio the whole time. They'd come in for dailies, but that was my first time doing like a daily session with a giant right next to you, getting live feedback, which was very cool, but very scary too.
Yeah, I admit I'm not as familiar with the other two, but obviously Bruce Smith. I mean, total legend for sure. Were you working side by side him or?
Not so much. It was all through a studio here in LA called 6 Point Harness, and it was mostly the directors in studio. But then the 3 kind of big directors would come in once a week for feedback and dailies.
Gotcha.
So I wasn't working with them super closely at all, but they're just, they have such big legacies that it was just cool to get their feedback. And even just at that point, because I had never been in dailies, it was my first time kind of seeing everybody else's work and seeing someone's feedback to it, which is a really valuable thing. You know, I had only ever gotten feedback for my work remotely, so one-on-one, but it's really cool to just kind of see all of the work and then watch somebody you respect critique all of it and see what they're seeing in it. So that was a cool thing about that.
What did you think about the differences between working almost, you know, kind of solo from home as opposed to working in a studio? Like, do you have a preference as to which one you like more than another?
I think because I've been at home so long, I am very comfortable being at home. And I just tend to be an introvert, so it's easier for me in some ways. But there are certain things. I kind of like the hybrid situation where
going
you
every
can
once
kind of get the best of both worlds, because being in person for dailies and really getting to know people and see what they're doing, and especially if you're working on paper, being able to see kind of firsthand what they're doing is very valuable, which when you're entirely remote, sometimes you can feel a little isolated.
Yeah. Was Hair Love, by the way, I was always trying to decipher whether or not Hair Love was partial 3D or like hand-drawn mixture. Like, I like, where does it...
I believe, I kind of
doing it let's talk about harmony or using it in but I thought harmony was like, I always thought that it was sort of like, you know, tradigital, you know what I mean? Like you're drawing and you're animating, but it's just on, you know, on a tablet. Yeah,
I think that if I remember correctly, and I was only there for the 2 weeks and then I left as they did all the cleanup. But I know that they had some harmony kind of puppeting for some scenes, which I think might be what you're talking about. Some of us were doing fully just drawing traditionally or digitally. But yeah, there was something, and I'm not entirely sure actually how they did the hair to get that effect, because that's not all
it's crazy.
Drawn. But but yeah, it was a cool effect.
Yeah, were you animating on a tablet at that point, or like a Cintiq or something like that, or like a...
Yeah, that was all just drawn into Toon Boom.
Yeah, which do you prefer, paper or...
I definitely prefer paper because it's what I'm most comfortable with. Weirdly, the majority of my jobs have been on paper. But digitally, obviously, has a lot of pros. There are just so many things that are easier where, you know, if you draw something in the wrong place on the paper, it can be so frustrating when you have the perfect drawing and you have to figure out, like, can I cut it out and kind of shift it over? Do I have to redraw it?
Yeah.
There are certain things like that are definitely easier, but just really like paper. The flipping and the
crinkling, the sound of it is incredible.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. So we only have a few more minutes, but I do want to try and talk to you a little bit about your current job. Firstly, how did you get to start working with Disney? I know they were opening up their training program. I guess it was a year or two ago, I think you were saying.
Yeah, I think it was not this last August, but the August before, so 2022, I think. And they reopened their training program, which I had, 10 years ago, it was like the thing I was hoping for. It was, all I wanted was for them to reopen it. And I had kind of stopped looking or thinking it would ever be
happen.
A possibility.
Yeah.
I had really fully started looking into just like freelance and independent stuff. But yeah, they opened it. And I applied because I kind of just couldn't imagine the opportunity to, learn from the mentors of the program, were Mark Henn, Eric Goldberg, Randy Haycock, for the character animation specifically, which was just kind of mind-boggling to me to go to the studio and to work with them, because it hadn't seemed like a possibility. And then the program was also, they had kind of made it a little bigger to also have mentorship with Rachel Bibb for cleanup and Dan Lund for effects. So it was just felt like a once in a lifetime thing for me. So I applied and was lucky to make the cut. I've been doing that for the last year and a half now.
I was trying to look up a little bit more of the history of Dan Lund because I swear he's been around for a while. I know he was doing, I think he may have been involved in some of the, I think he did that last Goofy short, how to set up your home entertainment system
the
or
three
something.
that were during the pandemic?
No, it was
before
before then. Yeah, it was actually really nicely animated. And so, is it more smaller projects that you're working on there, or is there something going on with anything bigger happening?
I am not at liberty, unfortunately, to talk about those specific projects. But I don't know. It's a lot of. We've been working. More broadly, we've done some projects for the parks, some projects that I can't talk about.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's been really, really cool, especially just to work with. And all the mentors are incredible, but because I'm a character animator, to work with Mark and Randy and Eric especially has been such a great opportunity, and to really see their differences. Everyone has such a different approach, and everyone has different strengths. I feel like they almost don't have weaknesses, but they all have different superpowers.
Yeah.
And it's just been really cool to kind of see how their process works.
How many people did they hire during the training program?
It was just 5 of us.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's a really little group. It's me, Robbie Cox, Tyler Picana, Ella Khan, and Austin Trailer, to shout out them. They're all such incredible artists.
Are they all animators or different?
We're all character animators specifically. Although, because we dabbled in cleanup and effects too, and they're all amazing at all of them. But
But they have did they also do work for did they hire people for obviously there's visual, there's all the background artists and layout and stuff like that. Are they hiring people for that too, or?
I don't know. I don't know what their larger plan is at all.
Yeah.
For our group, it was really just us. They have a small department kind of in place, so it was really just about growing it a little bit.
Sure.
Bringing in some new talent.
Nice. That sounds awesome. Well, I'm very excited to hear about all that.
Trying to be so vague.
No. I also want to be very respectful of the secrecy of that. Before we go, for listeners out there that are interested in getting into traditional animation, do you have any advice for getting into traditional animation these days, considering, I feel like obviously CG was incredibly dominant, but it feels like there is a growing groundswell for more traditional work in TV. Obviously, there's lots of opportunity with streaming. I know Netflix is just throwing all kinds of, I don't know if that's still the case, but I know they were for a while. Obviously, Warner Brothers is crushing it with doing a lot of the, classic Warner Brothers cartoons and stuff like that. We had Joey Caps. I'm not sure if you know who he is, but he's an incredible animator on the podcast a couple years back. But any advice that you would give for those that are seeking to get into the field?
It can be tricky, definitely, just because, especially in America, there still isn't that much opportunity, especially at the big studios. I've kind of always felt that kind of the general advice I would give is that it's very important to really be in touch with your priorities and what's at the core of your goals. Meaning, we can all kind of imagine our dream work scenario, what kind of projects we'd like to be, where we'd like to be, who we'd like to be working with. And I think we can also all probably make some compromises in there where we'd still be really happy. But there's like a core of the goal that if you compromise that, it's kind of not the dream anymore. So for me, it's always been really important to really know what those core priorities are and what I don't want to compromise, because that makes choices a lot easier, where it's like, you know, are you willing to not work at a big studio? Is the big studio a priority? Are you willing to travel for work? Because there's so much, there's so much internationally right now, and there has been for the last 10 years. Like, is that possible? Are you willing to do shorts or independent films or, any number of things? Because there are paths, and it can be hard to really know what's right or wrong, or like what might be successful. And I've always kind of felt like the only way to find that path is to know what's important to me and use that as the main guiding force, It's not easy to figure out a career where there aren't a lot of opportunities. It's not like a simple thing. But if you're in tune with what's important to you, it makes it a bit easier.
Love it. That's great advice. That's actually the first time I've heard an answer like that. That's really, that's awesome. Courtney, I really appreciate you taking the time. This is awesome getting to know you a little bit more. I'm very excited to see where your career moves towards. I'm very excited to see what happens at Disney. Please make a new feature animated film. I am very excited. Yeah, very excited for to see your name out there even more. And it was a pleasure getting to know you. So
thank you so much for having me. It's so much fun.
Best of luck, okay? All right. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Pencil Pushers Podcast. Follow us on Instagram at the Pencil Pushers Podcast for visual representation of our guest artwork, topics discussed, and anything else that contributes to the show. Be sure to subscribe. Tell a friend. Tell lots and lots of friends. Become a leadhead. And we're out.